The gardens of Etheria's royal palace had a peculiar quality at twilight. The indigenous flora responded to the planet's dual sunset by releasing bioluminescent particles that drifted upward like inverted snow. Princess Selithe stood on the crystalline balcony overlooking the eastern gardens, watching her daughters chase these floating lights between the twisting silver-barked trees that had stood for 3 centuries before her birth. Lyra, her eldest at 8 years, moved with the cautious grace of a child who had learned too young that joy could be snatched away without warning. Myra, 2 years younger, still possessed fragments of unself-conscious delight, though Selithe had noticed even those fragments dimming lately. "Your Highness, the Council is requesting your presence." Her attendant, Thuron, spoke from the doorway with apologetic formality. "The human delegation has raised concerns about the mineral surveys again." Selithe suppressed a sigh. The humans had arrived on Etheria 6 years ago with their efficient machines and earnest faces, offering technological partnerships that her people desperately needed. The arrangement had brought prosperity, yes, but also endless bureaucratic tangles that made her miss the simpler diplomatic crises of her youth. "Tell them I'll be there shortly. And send word to the children's attendants. The girls should be brought inside before full dark." She watched Lyra catch one of the luminescent particles and cup it carefully between her palms, showing it to Myra with a smile that looked like muscle memory rather than spontaneous happiness. 2 years. 2 years since Davian's shuttle had malfunctioned during a routine diplomatic run to the mining colonies. 2 years of watching her daughters slowly fold inward like flowers denied sunlight. "Mama, look." Myra's voice carried up to the balcony. "This one has purple spots." Selithe waved, forcing brightness into her expression, then turned toward the interior halls. The council chamber would be full of mining representatives, human engineers, and her own advisors, all of them treating resource allocation like a theological debate. She'd once enjoyed the intellectual challenge of such negotiations. Now they felt like elaborate games played while her daughters learned to smile with their mouths but not their eyes. The meeting proved exactly as tedious as anticipated. Section Chief Morrison from the Human Engineering Corps spent 20 minutes explaining why his teams needed access to the southern canyons for atmospheric processing equipment, while her own Minister of Resources countered with environmental impact projections that somehow required visual aids. Selithe found herself studying the holographic charts without actually processing the data, her mind drifting to whether Lyra had eaten properly at midday meal, whether Myra had finished her linguistic studies, whether either of them had laughed, truly laughed, in the past week. "Princess Selithe, your thoughts on the timeline." Morrison's accent turned her name into something blocky and efficient, very human. She refocused. "The southern canyons have cultural significance, Section Chief. Any installation would require." The chamber doors burst open. Captain Riveth, head of palace security, entered with an expression that transformed every diplomatic concern into irrelevant noise. His normally composed features carried something Selithe had never seen there before, barely controlled panic. "Your Highness." He didn't wait for permission to speak. "The princesses are missing." The words arrived in her ears but took several heartbeats to connect with meaning. Missing. Her daughters. The two concepts refused to align properly in her mind. "What do you mean missing?" "They're in the eastern gardens with their attendants." The attendants turned away to address a maintenance drone malfunction. When they looked back, both princesses were gone. "We've initiated full search protocols." Selithe was moving before conscious thought engaged, her chair scraping against the polished floor. The council members rose in confused alarm, but she was already through the doors, Riveth matching her stride as they rushed through corridors that suddenly felt like they stretched for miles. "Perimeter status." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "All shields engaged. No unauthorized exits detected. They're still within palace grounds." Still within palace grounds. Hundreds of acres of gardens, auxiliary buildings, maintenance tunnels, guest quarters where visiting humans stayed, and the lower gardens where the engineering teams had been installing their atmospheric processors. Her daughters could be anywhere, and the approaching darkness would make searching exponentially harder. Deploy every available guard. Prioritize the garden sectors and any areas with water features. Davian had drowned. The official report said equipment failure, but drowning was drowning, and Selith's mind went to dark water every time her daughters were out of sight for too long. The security center hummed with urgent activity when they arrived. Holographic displays showed the palace grounds from multiple angles, heat signatures marked in colored overlays, search teams moving through sectors with methodical efficiency. Selith forced herself to breathe properly, to think like a princess coordinating a crisis, rather than a mother whose chest felt like it was collapsing inward. Eastern gardens clear, moving to the ornamental pools. One guard's voice crackled through the comm system. Northern greenhouse negative, proceeding to the diplomatic quarters. The diplomatic quarters, where humans moved through with their different customs and their incomprehensible need to sleep lying down for 8 consecutive hours. Where strangers from another world had access to corridors and gardens and spaces that her daughters might have wandered into out of curiosity. Captain, she kept her voice level, have we accounted for all human personnel? Riveth consulted his tactical display. Most are in their assigned quarters. Engineering crews working evening shifts are logged at their duty stations. One contractor has permission to remain in the lower gardens for equipment calibration, a Rowan Cross environmental systems specialist. Send someone to verify he's seen nothing unusual. The minutes crawled past like wounded things. Each negative report tightened the band around Selith's chest. She reviewed surveillance footage with hands that wanted to tremble, watching her daughters play among the bioluminescent trees, seeing them slip between flowering hedges, then simply not appearing in the next camera's range, as if they'd been erased from existence by the growing shadows. Your Highness. Thuron appeared at her elbow with a cup of something warm. You should. I should find my daughters. The words came out sharper than intended. She softened her tone. Thank you, Thuron, but I need to think. Where would 2 grieving children go at twilight? What would draw them away from their attendants? Lyra had been asking questions lately about the human workers, curious about their strange flat ears and their compact builds. Myra collected pictures of Earth animals on her learning tablet, fascinated by creatures that had never evolved on Etheria. Captain, the human contractor in the lower gardens. Has anyone checked his location? Guard dispatched 3 minutes ago, Your Highness. Should have eyes on the site momentarily. The comm crackled. This is Guard Kelly's. I'm at the equipment site in the lower gardens. The contractor's tent is. Your Highness, I need you to come to these coordinates immediately. Selith's heart stopped. What have you found? A pause that lasted forever. The princesses, Your Highness, there. They're asleep, inside the human's tent. Selith ran. Royal protocol suggested that princesses moved with measured grace even during emergencies, but royal protocol had never addressed what happened when someone told you your missing children were found sleeping in a stranger's tent. Her feet struck the luminescent pathway stones hard enough to send ripples of light spreading outward with each step. Captain Riveth kept pace beside her, speaking rapidly into his comm unit and coordinating guards who were apparently trying to determine whether they just located kidnapping victims or stumbled into some sort of bizarre diplomatic incident. All units hold position at the lower garden's perimeter, Riveth ordered between breaths. Nobody moves until Her Highness assesses the situation. The lower gardens occupied a terraced section of the palace grounds, where human engineers had been installing atmospheric processors for the past month. Selith had approved the project without much attention to details, something about optimizing oxygen ratios and reducing pollen counts that triggered human allergies. Now she cursed her administrative distance as she rushed past humming equipment she didn't recognize, following the signal beacon on Riveth's tactical display. Guard Kelly's waited beside a small dome-shaped structure that Selith's brain needed a moment to classify. A tent. Humans apparently still used portable shelters even when permanent buildings stood nearby, some quirk of their species she'd never bothered to understand. This particular tent glowed faintly from internal lighting, and she could hear soft breathing from within, the unmistakable sound of sleeping children that every mother knew in her bones. "Report," Riveth commanded quietly. Kelly's looked profoundly uncomfortable, his hand hovering near his weapon as though he couldn't decide whether he was guarding prisoners or protecting sleepers. "Sir, I approached to question the human contractor about the missing princesses. Before I could announce myself, I heard them, sleeping. I verified visually through the tent opening." He swallowed. "Both princesses are alive and unharmed. They're sleeping beside the human. Actually, more accurately, they're sleeping against him." The words penetrated Selith's mind like individual projectiles. Against. Her daughters were sleeping against a human stranger. Not near him, against him. The implications piled up faster than she could process them. "Show me." Kelly's carefully pulled back the tent's entrance flap, angling his glow light to illuminate the interior without shining directly on the occupants' faces. The scene inside struck Selith with such force that she actually stumbled backward a step. Lyra lay curled on the human's right side, her head pillowed on his shoulder, one small hand clutching the fabric of his work shirt. Myra had somehow wedged herself against his left side, her face pressed into his ribs with the absolute trust of a sleeping child. The human himself, this Rowan Cross, slept with his arms positioned carefully to avoid dislodging either girl, his breathing deep and even. They looked peaceful. That was the detail that penetrated through Selith's shock and relief in building anger. Her daughters, who hadn't slept properly in 2 years, who woke screaming from nightmares about shuttle accidents, who required bioluminescent nightlights and sleeping attendants and still often lay awake until exhaustion claimed them. They looked peaceful. "Your Highness," Riveth's voice came from very far away. "Orders." What were the orders for this? The palace guard training manual probably didn't include a section on what to do when royal children are found cuddling with foreign contractors. Selith's relief at finding them alive and safe warred with mounting confusion about how they'd gotten here and what exactly had transpired. The human showed no signs of restraints or coercion. He was simply sleeping, as were her daughters, all 3 of them tangled together like they'd known each other for years rather than. How long had they known each other? "Wake them," Selith said quietly, carefully. Kelly's reached into the tent and gently touched the human's exposed foot. "Sir, wake up, sir." Rowan Cross stirred with the groggy confusion of someone pulled from deep sleep. His eyes opened, blinked at the light, then widened in escalating horror as he registered the armed guards surrounding his tent, the woman in royal dress standing in their midst, and the 2 small children using him as furniture. "Oh no." He said it in English first, then repeated it in careful but accented Etherian. "Oh no, no, no. This isn't, I can explain. They were just—" He tried to sit up, realized he was pinned by sleeping princesses, and froze in a tableau of pure panic. "Please don't shoot me." "Nobody's shooting anyone," Riveth said, though his hand remained on his weapon. "Yet." The movement and voices woke Lyra first. She lifted her head, blinking sleep from her eyes, and smiled at Rowan with drowsy contentment before noticing the audience. Her expression transformed instantly to confusion, then fear, not of the human she'd been sleeping against, Selith noted with painful clarity, but of the guards and the situation itself. "Mama." Lyra's voice came out small and uncertain. Myra woke next, sitting up so fast she nearly headbutted Rowan's chin. "We didn't mean to fall asleep. We were just listening to stories about Earth whales, and then—" She registered her mother's expression and stopped talking. Selith fought to keep her voice steady. "Girls, step out of the tent. Slowly, come to me." They obeyed with the terrible compliance of children who knew they'd crossed some enormous line. but weren't entirely sure which one. Selithe pulled them against her sides, checking them over with hands that wanted to shake. No injuries, no signs of distress. Their clothes were rumpled from sleep but intact. They smelled like garden flowers and that slightly mechanical scent that clung to all the human equipment. Rowan had managed to extract himself from the tent, and now stood with his hands raised in a gesture Selithe recognized from human media as surrender. He was shorter than most Etherian men, built with the compact musculature common to his species, his dark hair sticking up in directions that suggested he'd been asleep for some time. His flat human ears pressed against his skull in a way that made him look perpetually startled. "Your Highness," he began, speaking carefully in Etherian, "I swear I had no idea they were princesses. They just appeared while I was running diagnostics, asked about my equipment, and I answered their questions. They seemed interested, so I showed them some Earth pictures and they asked for stories, and I thought one story wouldn't hurt before I walked them back to wherever they'd come from. But then they asked for another story, and another, and somewhere during the whale migration explanation they just—" He gestured helplessly at the tent. "They fell asleep, and I was so tired from 48 hours of calibration work that I fell asleep too. I'm so sorry. This is a massive security breach and possibly 17 kinds of illegal, and I swear I'll leave Etheria immediately if—" "Stop talking," Selithe said. He stopped. She looked at her daughters, both of whom were determinedly studying the ground. "You too, start from the beginning, and I want the truth." Selithe dismissed the guards with a gesture that left no room for argument, though Captain Riveth lingered at the perimeter with the stubborn loyalty of someone who'd served her family for 2 decades. She kept her daughters close while addressing Rowan with the sort of controlled calm that preceded either mercy or execution. "You will accompany us to my private quarters. We're going to have a conversation about why my children, who have attendants, tutors, and an entire palace staff dedicated to their welfare, decided that sleeping in a stranger's tent was preferable to their own beds." Rowan nodded with the enthusiasm of a man being led to his own trial. "Yes, Your Highness, absolutely, whatever you need." The walk back through the palace grounds occurred in silence broken only by the soft hum of nocturnal insects and the occasional hiccup from Myra, who cried quietly against Selithe's side. Lyra maintained rigid composure, but her hand gripped her mother's with enough force to hurt. Palace staff who'd been mobilized for the search paused to stare as the procession passed. Their princess, her missing daughters, and a human contractor who looked like he was calculating the fastest route to his homeworld. Selithe's private sitting room occupied the western tower with windows overlooking the capital city's lights. She'd furnished it with low, comfortable seating designed for family rather than diplomatic functions, though the crystalline walls and bioluminescent ceiling fixtures marked it as unmistakably royal. She directed the girls to sit on the curved couch, positioned herself across from them, and pointed Rowan toward a chair that had been designed for someone with Etherian proportions, meaning he looked rather like a child testing furniture in an adult's home when he perched on its edge. "Now," Selithe said, folding her hands to keep them from trembling, "Lyra, explain." Her eldest daughter took a breath that seemed to require significant courage. "We've been watching him work for 3 weeks now, since he started installing the air machines in the lower gardens." "You've been watching him." Selithe kept her voice neutral despite the alarm bells this triggered. "How often?" "Every day." Lyra offered it as a question, as though uncertain whether honesty would improve or worsen her situation. "During afternoon study period. The attendants think we're in the library, but there's a terrace that overlooks the lower gardens, and we can see everything from there." Rowan made a strangled sound. "You're the hedge spies. I thought I was hallucinating from sleep deprivation." "Hedge spies?" Selithe repeated. "I kept seeing these flashes of blonde hair behind the flowering shrubs while I worked. Thought maybe the local fauna was more colorful than the briefing materials suggested." He caught Selithe's expression and added quickly, "I didn't approach them or anything. They seemed harmless. Children are curious. I remember being curious. Myra apparently decided this constituted permission to join the conversation. You noticed us on the fourth day and waved. Then you held up your data tablet and showed us pictures of Earth mountains. You were watching me through macrobinoculars, Rowan protested. Seemed rude not to acknowledge it. And you waved back, so I figured you were friendly local kids, not. He gestured at the palatial surroundings. Royalty conducting covert surveillance operations. Selaith pressed her fingers to her temples where a headache was building. So you've been exchanging waves and pictures with my daughters for 3 weeks, and nobody thought to mention this to me. We didn't think you'd let us keep watching, Lyra said in a small voice. You worry about everything now. Since Papa died, we can't do anything without 6 attendants and a security briefing. The words hit harder than they should have. Selaith wanted to argue, to explain that protective measures were necessary, that losing their father had taught her how quickly joy could transform into tragedy. Instead, she said, "Continue. How did watching someone work lead to sleeping in his tent?" The girls exchanged glances, engaging in some wordless sibling communication that Selaith both recognized and resented being excluded from. Finally, Lyra spoke. "Tonight we saw him setting up the tent again. He's been sleeping there for 3 days because the calibration sequence can't be interrupted. We wanted to see inside it." Human tents are different from Etherian camping structures, Myra added helpfully. Ours are grown from biomaterials. Theirs are assembled from synthetic fabrics. We studied it in cultural exchange lessons. So you decided to conduct field research. Selaith's voice came out flat. We were going to just look, Lyra insisted. But he was sitting outside running tests on some handheld device, and when he saw us he didn't seem surprised. He just said hello, and asked if we wanted to see how the atmospheric processor worked. Rowan shifted uncomfortably in his oversized chair. In my defense, they asked very intelligent questions about the carbon filtration systems. Most adults glaze over when I explain particulate separation mechanics. He made it interesting, Myra said. Not like tutors who use the educational holograms that smell like disinfectant. He showed us real diagrams from Earth and explained how oxygen ratios are different there and why humans need adjustments to breathe comfortably here. Then I showed them pictures of Earth oceans, Rowan continued, seemingly resigned to confession, which led to questions about marine life, which led to me explaining whale migration patterns, which somehow turned into an impromptu xenobiology lesson lasting. He checked his chronometer and winced. Approximately 2.5 hours, apparently. 2.5 hours. Selaith looked at her daughters. Your attendants thought you'd been gone for 30 minutes. Lyra had the grace to look guilty. We told them we were playing in the hedge maze. It's big enough that they give us privacy there. And the falling asleep portion of this evening, Selaith asked with dangerous calm. Myra's eyes filled with fresh tears. We asked for stories, real ones, not educational content. He told us about Earth whales singing to each other across entire oceans, and about giant squids that glow in the deep water, and about seahorses where the fathers carry the babies. She hiccuped. Nobody tells us stories anymore. Not since Papa died. Everyone's too worried about protocols and emotional stability assessments. The words struck Selaith silent. She looked at Rowan, who'd gone very still in his chair. They asked why seahorse fathers carried the babies, he said quietly. I explained it was their biological role, that different species have different parenting structures. Then Myra asked if human fathers tell bedtime stories. I said mine did. She asked what kind. He paused. I didn't realize they were upset about something. They just seemed like curious kids. So I told them a story my father told me about stars being ancient light and how we're all made of star stuff. And halfway through, I felt weight against my sides and they'd just gone to sleep. You should have woken them, Selaith said, but the accusation lacked force. I know I tried. For about 30 seconds before I realized they were deeply asleep, the kind where waking them seemed cruel. and I thought I'd just rest my eyes for a moment until they woke naturally, and then I'd escort them back and apologize to whoever needed apologizing to. He met Selythe's gaze with something like defiance. I didn't hurt them. I didn't touch them inappropriately. They fell asleep listening to stories about seahorses and stars, and I let them sleep because they seemed like they needed it. Selythe turned to her youngest daughter. Myra, tell me truthfully, why did you fall asleep against a stranger? Myra's voice came out barely above a whisper. He feels safe, like Papa used to feel. Warm and solid, and like nothing bad will happen while he's there. She looked up with eyes that held far too much grief for 6 years. I had no bad dreams, Mama. No dreams about the shuttle accident. Just whales singing in dark water. The silence that followed Myra's confession felt like something physical pressing against Selythe's chest. She looked at her youngest daughter's tear-streaked face, at Lyra's protective posture beside her sister, at Rowan Cross sitting in an oversized chair looking like he wanted to apologize for existing. Somewhere in the past 4 hours, she transformed from a desperate mother, searching for missing children, into someone who had to reckon with the uncomfortable truth that her daughters had found comfort she hadn't been able to provide. No bad dreams, Selythe repeated slowly. You haven't slept without nightmares in 2 years. Myra nodded miserably. The sleep therapist says my subconscious associates rest with vulnerability, that I'm afraid something bad will happen if I'm not vigilant. She recited it with the flat precision of a child who'd heard the assessment too many times. Sleeping requires feeling safe. I don't feel safe most places anymore. But you felt safe with a human stranger you've been spying on for 3 weeks. He wasn't strange, Lyra interjected. We'd been watching him work. He's methodical and careful with his equipment. He notices things, like when the garden drones need their sensors cleaned, or when the bioluminescent flowers start wilting. He fixed a broken irrigation line last week that nobody else had spotted. Papa used to notice things like that too, details that mattered. Rowan shifted in his chair with visible discomfort. I really think I should leave now. This feels like a family conversation that doesn't require an audience who caused it. Stay, Selythe commanded, then softened her tone. Please, I need to understand what happened here, and apparently you're central to it whether either of us intended that or not. He settled back with the resignation of a man who'd accepted his fate. For what it's worth, they're remarkable kids. The questions they asked about the atmospheric processors showed genuine scientific curiosity. Lyra understood the carbon filtration mechanics faster than half my engineering team. And Myra, he smiled slightly. Myra asked if the machines made the air taste different, which is actually a more sophisticated question than it sounds. Perception of atmospheric composition involves complex sensory integration. You sound like you enjoyed teaching them, Selythe observed. I did. They were interested because they wanted to know, not because they needed to pass an assessment. That's rare at any age. He paused. Though I should mention I had no idea they were skipping lessons to watch me work. If I'd known I was facilitating truancy, I would have marched them straight back to their tutors. Would you really? Lyra challenged. You let us watch for 3 weeks. You could have reported us any time. I thought you had permission, Rowan protested. Naive in retrospect, but you seemed perfectly comfortable being there. How was I supposed to know you were conducting covert operations? He glanced at Selythe. Your daughters have excellent surveillance skills, by the way. Should probably be concerning from a security standpoint. Despite everything, Selythe felt a hysterical laugh building in her throat. I'll add it to the list of concerns. Currently ranked somewhere below, my children sleep in strangers' tents, but above, my children are apparently smarter than my security staff. Myra giggled wetly, then looked guilty about it. Lyra maintained her serious expression, but her shoulders relaxed fractionally. Rowan looked like someone watching a bomb defusal in real time, uncertain whether things were getting better or worse. Selythe stood and walked to the windows overlooking the city. The capital's bioluminescent architecture created patterns of light that had comforted her since childhood, familiar, beautiful, safe. She'd been trying to preserve that safety for her daughters through protocols and attendance and carefully controlled environments. Instead, she'd apparently created a gilded cage that made them seek comfort from a human engineer who told stories about seahorses. "How long is your contract?" she asked without turning. Rowan answered carefully. "The calibration sequence completes tomorrow. After that, I submit my final reports and return to the human residential sector. I'll probably ship back to Earth within the week, unless another assignment comes through." "No," Myra's voice cracked with panic. "He can't leave. Mama, you can't let him leave." "But we just found him," Lyra added, her composure finally breaking. "You can't let him disappear too. Everyone disappears. Papa disappeared, and now the nice man who tells stories about stars is going to disappear, and we'll just have tutors and attendants and people who worry about our emotional stability, but nobody who—" She stopped, breathing hard. "Nobody who what?" Selythe asked gently. "Nobody who makes us feel like regular kids instead of broken princesses everyone has to fix." The words hung in the air like an indictment. Selythe turned to face her daughters, seeing them clearly perhaps for the first time since Davian's death. They'd been treading water in grief, while she'd been so focused on keeping them safe that she'd forgotten they also needed to feel normal. To ask questions about atmospheric processors, to hear stories about Earth oceans, to fall asleep against someone who radiated the particular kind of safety that came from not treating them like fragile things that might shatter. "Your Highness," Rowan said quietly, "I should clarify something. I didn't do anything special tonight. I just answered questions and told stories. What happened, your daughters falling asleep, feeling safe, that's about them recognizing something they needed, not about me being somehow remarkable. Any decent person would have done the same. Any decent person would have woken them and found their attendants immediately," Selythe countered. "You let them sleep." "They looked peaceful," he said simply. After 2 hours of questions and stories, they looked like kids who'd been running on empty and finally hit reserve power. "I made a judgment call. Possibly a terrible one from a protocol standpoint, but I stand by it from a human decency standpoint." Selythe studied him. This compact human with his flat ears and his earnest explanations, who'd accidentally become important to her daughters through nothing more than kindness and patience. An idea was forming, ridiculous and impulsive and completely at odds with her usual careful approach to decisions. "What if you didn't leave?" she heard herself say. Everyone stared at her. Rowan's expression suggested he'd misheard. "I'm sorry. Your contract ends tomorrow. I'm offering you a new one. Permanent position as a palace consultant for environmental systems. You'd maintain the atmospheric processors, oversee their operation, train local staff." She kept her voice level despite her racing heart. "The position comes with residential quarters in the palace complex. You'd be available for ongoing consultation regarding any technical issues that arise." "That's extremely generous, but I'm not sure I understand why you'd need a permanent consultant for equipment that